Hello and welcome again to the Composer's Life. My name is Nadia Mer. I'm your host, and this podcast is all things about composing, composers, what they do day to day, what we do day to day, I guess, um, interviews, resources, advice, all of it. So, if that is something that would interest you, please follow and rate this podcast with 5 stars. My name is Nadia, like I said, and I just recently graduated from Berklee College of Music with a degree in film scoring. I'm just starting on my career in composing and everything, so I am sharing things I have learned, things I'm learning, and my journey to follow my dreams. So that's everything about me. Just an update. I'm still doing the same things as last week, so sending applications in for internships, assistantships, jobs, all of that, and just practicing piano every day, practicing film scoring and composing, and learning from everything that I can, and just watching YouTube videos, LinkedIn videos, all of that stuff so I can get better at what I do. So today we are going to be building on what we talked about last week, which is basically the beginnings of music theory concepts. And if you remember, I gave you an exercise to compose and complete 10 phrases, thinking about a bunch of different things while you're composing them. So we're going to build upon that this week. And if you missed it, you're welcome to go back and listen, or if you want to just keep listening to this one today. And yep, then do that. Also, by the way, sorry, there's no intro and outro music again because my computer charger is broken and I have no way to get my music. So we're going to make our own music while we do this. So, anyways, last week, just to review, I was talking about form. So, every piece of music has a form to it. It's an entire whole made up of different parts. And we started talking about those parts, and in those parts are made up of phrases. And a phrase is a complete idea that you can sing in one breath. So, again, the challenge was to compose 10 of those, thinking about rhythm, tempo, meter, duration, dynamics, and expression. And I've probably missed something, but that is the general idea of things. So now that hopefully you better understand what a phrase is, we're going to build upon that, and I'm going to introduce a little bit more vocabulary and then have another exercise for you to do this week with the phrases that you composed. So, the first thing that we're going to talk about today is a motive or a motif. So, in music, with these phrases, I used a word called expression, which is thinking about what you're trying to portray and express in the music that you're composing, or specifically for us, the phrase, whichever, all the phrases. Each phrase should be trying to express something with all of the other things we're trying to think about. So, when you have a cohesive phrase that has expression and everything, we call this a motive. And in music, there are motives and motifs repeated throughout pieces. The only thing is, like, if we were to repeat the same phrase throughout an entire piece of music, it might get kind of boring. There are pieces like that, and they are very meditative, and, that's a different genre than maybe what we're talking about today. But if we took one phrase, for instance, if we took this phrase that I composed last week, and we repeated that for 5 minutes, you might get a little bored, and that might not be your goal in the piece you're trying to compose. So we're going to talk about how we can take a motif or an idea, and put it into variations or changes so that your piece can become, cohesive but exciting and different and have different ideas and expressions of things in it. So, we're going to talk about how we can take those phrases and turn them into variations. Another important thing that I want to talk about before we get into how we can do that is an interval. So in music, we have our notes, and I'm going to start with middle C. Okay, so here is middle C. I'm playing that note on the keyboard. And when I say an interval, I am talking about how many notes are between one note and another note. So I'm going to play right now middle C and G. So they aren't right next to each other. As you can hear, there's some space in between those notes. And what those spaces are and what we call that is an interval. This specific interval is a fifth. So when I'm talking about intervals, I'm talking about how many notes it's separated by. Just to help clarify, if I ask you to play middle C and ask you to go up half a step, it's going to be D flat, or the black key right up from middle C on the keyboard, okay? Now, if I ask you to go a whole step up, you would play the white key directly to the right of middle C. So that's a whole step. So I'll let you hear again. This is a half step, and this is a whole step. And then again, the fifth interval is C and G. Okay, so you don't need to remember that specifically about C and stuff, but that's what an interval is. It's just the space in between notes and how many spaces there are and how many notes are in between. So if a note is right next to another note, like the C to the D flat to that black key, it's a half step. And if there's a little note in between, it's a whole step. That is going to be an important concept for us. That's why I wanted to talk about it before we move on. Anyway, so we are talking about how to take your phrases and your motifs, your ideas, and put variations on them to basically continue with the compositional process. So, what I want you to do, you're totally welcome to do it with all 10 of your phrases, but I want you to pick 5 of your most favorite phrases that you composed, and we're going to do this exercises with those phrases this week. So I will be using the 3 that I came up with last week, and I will play those for you as we go so that you remember the original and show you the process I go through when I'm putting variations on them. So the first thing we can think about when changing, I guess I was going to say variating, but I don't think that's a word. So the first thing we can do when we're changing a phrase or a musical idea is to think about the rhythm. So just a reminder, that is how short and long you're holding and playing notes and the stress on those notes. So I can think about my note duration, so how long and short I'm holding the notes, repetition in different notes, shifting the beat a bit to change things up, changing the tempo, or changing the meter. These are a bunch of things we can change with the rhythm. So I'm going to play you an example now. I'm going to take this melody that I came up with last week and play with the rhythm a little bit. So here's the process I went through. Okay, so for these examples, the first one, I changed up the meter a bit as well as the duration of the notes. So I hold those first 1 count notes a little longer, and the second 2 notes I play a little faster. And then in the second rhythmic variation, I again was just playing with how I can change those notes up. So that's an example of putting some variation on it through rhythm. Now let's talk about melodically changing the melody so that I kind of have a different idea from it. So this is where intervals come in. One option is to change the intervals and actually invert it. Basically what that means is I'm going to play again my fifth, C to G. So that's a fifth apart. Now, if I invert those intervals, I'm going to start on C and actually play the F below C. That's inverting my melody. So that's something I'm going to try with my melody right now. So, as you heard, I was playing the original melody and seeing the interval that I was playing, and then trying to do basically opposite of that. So, moving down on the piano and then changing the notes that needed to be changed. So, that's one way we can melodically change the motif. Another thing we can do is change the individual notes in the melody. So whether we change them to white or black notes, or just, try and change the sound up a bit. So I'm going to do that as well. So, as you can hear, I changed the individual notes a bit, and if I was spending more time on it, I'd probably make it sound a bit more cohesive and what I want it to sound like, but that's just for sake of giving you an example of how to change those things. So, now let's think about changing the rhythm and melody together. So, let me try another variation. So there we go. I played with the variation of the melody and rhythm at the same time. Maybe not the most beautiful sounding, which is totally fine. The purpose of these exercises are to help you come up with new ideas and see what else there is available to you, because maybe the second variation that I played with the melody, I wouldn't have ever thought of in my head, but because I did that exercise, I actually kind of like how it sounded. So, your exercise or challenge for this week is to take 5 of your favorite phrases that you made last week and do some variations on them. So I would say try to do 3 variations on each phrase. So thinking about intervals, inversion, you can think about changing notes, changing the rhythms, but 3 variations of each phrase. So in all, you will probably have 15 variations in total. So 3 for each of the 5 phrases. I think I've repeated that about 20 times, so hopefully that makes sense. So again, this exercise doesn't necessarily have to be the most beautiful thing you've ever heard. It just gets your mind to start thinking and being like, "Ooh, I really like that," or "I really hate that," which is just as fine. And it will just, help you get started on something. So again, we talked about motif today, about that expression or that sound, that cohesive sentence and thing you're trying to say in the phrase, and variating, again, I don't know if that's a word, changing it up so it's not going to be repeated the whole time. So, next week, we will again build upon this concept and go a little further. So, make sure that you have composed all of those variations. And I will talk to you next week. Again, there won't be outro music. Don't panic. My charger is dead. I hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week.